If Israel bombs Iran's nuclear plant, would it start the holy war the Middle East is so furiously preaching in this radical mosque? Listen to this. Iran is also looking for ways to attack America. Just a few days ago, 2 Iranian security guards were expelled from the U.S. after being caught red-handed taking photos of New York spots. You read a little article in the paper about that big describing that. The New York Daily News reported that these men were taking pictures with their cameras hidden under their clothes, and they had paid particular attention to St. Patrick's Cathedral and Rockefeller Center. 2 high-profile targets for international terrorism. This story becomes even more troubling when you listen to Hassan Abisi. Abisi is one of the Iranian henchmen now in control of that nation. His official title is long, but listen, is the head of the Revolutionary Guard's Center for Doctrinaire Affairs of National Security outside of Iran's borders. That takes a big plaque to get all that on there. That's a very long phrase for terrorist. A few weeks ago, Abisi made this threat, quote, "We will map 29 sensitive sites in the United States and give the information to all international terrorist organizations." In other words, he asserted, quote, "We have a strategy drawn up for the destruction of Anglo-Saxon civilization," end of quote. Is that clear to you? We have a plan drawn up for the destruction of Anglo-Saxon civilization, and for those of you who are weak in history, that's you. Let me give you a peek into the mindset of these terrorists. They believe that killing Christians and Jews is the will of God and that it pleases God, their God, whenever it happens. Omar Muhammad is a suspected Al-Qaeda terrorist who was interviewed recently in a Portuguese newspaper, Público. And here's what he had to say about the international killing of civilians, quote, "We don't make a distinction between civilians and non-civilians, innocent and not innocent, only between Muslims and non-believers. And the life of a non-believer has no value. There is no sanctity in it. Terror is the language of the 21st century." He continues, "If I want something, I terrorize you to achieve it." The word terrorism is not new among Muslims, he says. Muhammad said, and I quote him, "I am the prophet who laughs when he is killing the enemy." Is that clear to you? That should be very clear to you. William McKay sat in my office this week, and William McKay is a man who has interviewed terrorists by the thousands of hours and has reported to me in my office. He said, "There's an Islamic phrase that's now being used in the Middle East, and the phrase is this: we'll get the Saturday people first and the Sunday people next." The Saturday people are the Jews. They go to synagogue on Saturday. Christians go on Sunday. Of course, for some of you, God himself can't find you on Sunday, so you're going to be real safe. I just couldn't let that pass. To validate my statement, this is a war of civilizations. Let me share with you William McKay's final statement to me before he left the office. He said, quote, "It's no longer a question of if the Jews will be asked to leave Europe. It's only a matter of time. Anti-Semitism in Europe is running off the charts. 25% of France's population is Islamic. That's why the French are so soft when dealing with the United States. It's a global war, it's a religious war, and it's going to lead to the war of civilizations." Now, thirdly, what role is Saudi Arabia playing in this war? They are Jekyll and Hyde. In Washington, they present themselves as friends, but in reality, they are funding terrorism right and left. European governments have been making a shocking discovery that many of the extremist-oriented mosques in France, Germany, Belgium, Italy, etc., are being funded by Saudi Arabian money. And they're funding those radical preachers, Yahidist, if you will, holy war advocates, to fill all of those empty mosques. In America, we're lagging far behind some of our European friends in determining that Saudi money is driving the terrorist effort in America. There's a substantial evidence to suggest that some radical terrorist sects have funded by the Saudis is in control of many American mosques. I reported to you in a previous series that there are now more mosques in America than Assemblies of God churches. That's a shocking fact for Americans. In addition, Saudi money is now funding chairs in Middle Eastern studies in major universities in the United States of America. How many of you know what a chair is in a university? It's not something you sit in. How many of you know what a chair is? How many of you don't know what that is? More than half of you don't. A chair in a university is when someone who has wealth goes to them and says, I will give you $2 million to establish a chair on Middle Eastern studies. I will hire the professor, and I want him to teach this field of academic discipline in your university. Give any American university a couple of $1 million and they'll create any chair that you want. But Saudi Arabia is doing this, and they're putting in that chair a professor who is anti-Israel and anti-American. And if you will, in short, they are taking the dollars that we, the American people, are buying at the gas pump and taking our dollars and funding those chairs to cause the next generation of Americans to be anti-American and anti-capitalism and anti-Israel. And that's a fact of life. That is happening. The FBI discovered that Saudi Arabia dumped $24 million between 1997 and 1999 into a Washington law firm with close connections to the Clinton White House. That's what you call influence peddling. In 1996, the Sudan government captured Osama bin Laden. They offered him to the Saudi government. They declined to take him. Why? Osama bin Laden was so popular in Saudi Arabia that his arrest would have created a riot, a public riot. The fact is that 15 of the 19 hijackers that murdered 3,000 Americans in New York were Saudi citizens. Robert Baer, author of the New York Times bestseller, See No Evil, reports that the wife of the Saudi ambassador to the United States handed out money that found its way into the hands of 2 of the 9/11 hijackers. The Saudi government says they don't understand how that happened. The U.S. State Department considers putting Saudi Arabia on the blacklist of nations that restrict religious freedom. Nations like Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. Christians in Saudi were being put in jail. Christians were having their Bibles confiscated, and Christians were harassed by the Saudi religious police. Robert Baer, in his powerful book, reveals how our government's cynical relationship with Saudi Arabia and America's absolute dependence on Saudi Arabian oil makes America very vulnerable for an economic collapse. Now listen very closely. Robert Baer, who was a CIA operative in the Ronald Reagan administration, reveals that during the Reagan era, disaster planners assessed the vulnerability of the Saudi Arabian oil infrastructure, that would be refineries, to terrorists. And because those fields are so open and so indefensible, a plan was put together during the Reagan administration that if those fields were attacked, they would be taken over by a U.S. military force. Why? As a matter of national security. Why? So that we would not have an overnight economic crash. 25 years ago, our CIA determined that it would be very easy for the terrorists to attack the Saudi oil infrastructure with aircraft loaded with explosives and crash into the oil infrastructure of Saudi Arabia, and that it would destroy the capability to refine oil for 12 to 18 months, at which all Western civilization economies would be wiped out. It would require much less sophistication for about half a dozen planes to fly into critical refineries, and the oil fields are out of business. Why would the Saudi terrorists attack the Saudi oil infrastructure? One, because the Saudi terrorists, remember, are fanatical religious people, and they believe that the royal families are immoral in their lifestyle, and they're extremely angry about that. Secondly, they resent them for allowing Americans to build on Saudi soil. That means put an American military post. Anything, the very presence of an American putting his foot on their soil defiles that country in their mindset, because we are infidels in their mindset.